"You're too old, Zeke," foreman Buck Ramirez shouted at the 68-year-old construction worker outside Chicago Union Station in 1970. Ezekiel Zeke Holloway had been building America for 45 years, his weathered hands having shaped everything from small-town churches to city skyscrapers. But today, those same hands that had never dropped a hammer or missed a measurement were being told they were no longer wanted. "I don't care what you've built before," Buck continued, his voice cutting through the morning air as other workers gathered around. "This is a modern job site. We need speed, not stories about the old days. You're slowing us down." Zeke stood there in his worn work boots and faded jeans, his tool belt hanging heavy around his waist, tools that had been with him since 1930 when he started as a 16-year-old apprentice. At 68, he could still outwork men half his age, but Buck Ramirez only saw gray hair and assumed limitations. Ray Charles was arriving at Union Station that morning for a recording session at nearby chess studios. As his car pulled up to the renovation site, he could hear the heated discussion between the foreman and the older worker. Something about the tone made him ask his driver to stop. "What's the problem here?" Ray asked, stepping out of his car with his white cane, his distinctive sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. Buck looked surprised to see Ray Charles but quickly tried to assert his authority. "No problem, Mr. Charles. Just dealing with some personnel issues. This old-timer here doesn't understand that construction has moved beyond his time." Ray turned toward Zeke's voice as the older man spoke quietly. "I've been building since before you were born, son. I know every inch of this station, helped renovate the East Wing back in '52. 45 years in construction," Ray said thoughtfully. "That's a lot of knowledge to walk away from." He paused, sensing the tension in the air. "Tell me, Zeke, what makes a good building last?" Zeke's voice grew stronger as he answered. "Foundation work that nobody sees, Mr. Charles. Attention to detail that shows respect for the craft. Understanding that what you build today has to serve people for generations." Buck scoffed. "That's old-school thinking. We have schedules to meet, efficiency targets. This isn't 1930. Ray was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Buck, how long have you been a foreman?" 3 years, Buck replied with pride. "Youngest foreman this company's ever had." "And how many buildings have you seen from groundbreaking to completion?" 4 major projects, Buck answered, sensing where this was going. Ray nodded slowly. "Zeke, how many?" 217, Mr. Charles, including this station the first time around." The number hung in the air like a challenge. Ray Charles, who had spent his career respecting the musicians who came before him, understood something that Buck Ramirez was missing. "You know what?" Ray said, making a decision that would surprise everyone. "I'm recording at Chess Studios for the next 3 months. I need someone to oversee some renovations to my suite there. Someone who understands that quality matters more than speed." He turned toward Zeke. "You interested in a consulting job?" Zeke's voice was uncertain. "Mr. Charles, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just a construction worker." "No," Ray said firmly. "You're a master craftsman. There's a difference." He addressed Buck directly. "You want efficiency. Real efficiency comes from doing things right the first time. That takes knowledge, not just speed." What happened next became a turning point, not just for Zeke Holloway, but for how the construction industry would come to view experienced workers. Ray Charles hired Zeke as a master consultant, and word spread quickly through Chicago's construction community about the legendary musician who had chosen craftsmanship over cost-cutting. Within a week, Zeke was working on Ray's studio renovations, but his role expanded far beyond what anyone expected. Young workers began seeking him out, asking questions about techniques they'd never learned in trade school. Zeke found himself teaching traditional methods that created stronger, more durable results than modern shortcuts. "These boys know how to use power tools," Zeke told Ray one afternoon, as they reviewed progress on the studio. "But they don't understand wood grain, don't know how to read a building's stress points. They're fast, but they're not thorough." Ray listened intently. "What would happen if you taught them?" "They'd be better builders," Zeke said simply, "and the buildings would last longer." This conversation led to an innovation that would influence construction practices for decades. Ray Charles, understanding the value of preservation and tradition from his own musical experience, proposed something revolutionary: an intergenerational mentorship program where experienced craftsmen like Zeke would work alongside younger workers, sharing knowledge while learning new techniques. The program started small, with Zeke training 3 young workers on Ray's studio project. But the results were immediately apparent. The combination of traditional craftsmanship with modern efficiency created work of exceptional quality completed in record time. Sterling Blackwood, the project manager who had initially supported Buck's decision to fire Zeke, found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about construction management. "I've never seen work this precise," he admitted to Ray. "These young guys are learning techniques I didn't know existed." Buck Ramirez, meanwhile, was struggling. Without Zeke's experience to guide difficult decisions, he made several costly mistakes on other projects. A foundation that Zeke would have caught as incorrectly poured had to be completely redone. Electrical work that Zeke would have flagged as potentially dangerous failed inspection. 3 months into Ray's studio project, Buck approached Zeke with an apology that surprised everyone. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I thought experience meant slow. I didn't understand it meant smart." Zeke's response reflected the wisdom that comes from 4 decades in construction. "Son, every building teaches you something if you pay attention. I've been paying attention for 45 years. That's not old-fashioned. That's education." Ray Charles was so impressed with the mentorship program's success that he began advocating for it throughout Chicago's construction industry. He spoke at trade organization meetings, sharing what he'd learned about the value of combining experience with innovation. In music, Ray told one gathering of construction executives, "We call it respecting your elders while finding your own voice. You don't throw away Louis Armstrong because you have modern recording techniques. You learn from Armstrong and use modern techniques to make the music better." The impact was remarkable. Construction companies across Chicago began implementing similar mentorship programs. Experienced workers who had been pushed toward early retirement found themselves in demand as teachers and consultants. Young workers who had been struggling with complex projects suddenly had access to knowledge that couldn't be learned from textbooks. Zeke Holloway became the prototype for a new kind of construction professional, the master craftsman consultant. He worked on projects throughout the Midwest, training young workers while contributing his expertise to increasingly complex builds. "Zeke changed how I think about my career," said Tommy Richardson, one of the first young workers in the program. "I thought construction was just about getting things done fast. He taught me it's about getting things done right, so they last." The program's success attracted attention from construction schools and trade organizations across the country. By 1978, variations of the Zeke Holloway method were being taught in vocational programs from California to New York, but perhaps the most significant impact was on Zeke himself. After 45 years of being just a construction worker, he discovered that he was actually a teacher, a mentor, and a repository of irreplaceable knowledge. "Mr. Charles showed me something I never understood," Zeke reflected years later. "He showed me that what I knew wasn't just job skills. It was history. Every building technique I learned, every shortcut I discovered, every mistake I made and learned from Mons, that was knowledge worth preserving." The Ray Charles Studio project became a showcase for the mentorship approach. Completed ahead of schedule and under budget, it demonstrated that respecting experience and embracing innovation weren't competing priority. They were complementary strengths. Musicians who recorded at the studio often commented on the quality of the acoustics, the attention to detail in the construction, the sense that the building itself supported their creative work. They didn't know they were experiencing the result of 45 years of craftsmanship combined with modern engineering. Ray Charles continued to advocate for intergenerational workplace programs throughout his career. He understood, from his own experience as a musician who had learned from blues masters while pioneering new sounds, that knowledge transfer was essential for any craft to thrive. The construction industry wasn't the only field to benefit from Ray's advocacy. His speeches about the value of experience led to similar programs in manufacturing, skilled trades, and even healthcare, where experienced nurses began mentoring new graduates in techniques that couldn't be learned in nursing school. Dr. Margaret Chen, who studied workplace dynamics at Northwestern University, documented the long-term effects of the mentorship programs inspired by Ray Charles and Zeke Holloway. Her research showed significant improvements in job quality, worker satisfaction, and project outcomes in companies that implemented intergenerational training. What Ray Charles understood intuitively, Dr. Chen wrote, was that experience isn't just about doing things the old way. It's about understanding why certain ways work and how to adapt them to new circumstances. Zeke Holloway worked until he was 78, spending his final 10 years primarily as a teacher and mentor. The construction techniques he developed and refined were documented in training manuals that became standard references in trade schools across the country. When Zeke retired in 1985, more than 200 young workers had trained under his direct supervision. The quality improvements and cost savings from projects that used his methods were documented in case studies that influenced construction management practices for decades. Buck Ramirez, who had fired Zeke for being too old, eventually became one of the strongest advocates for experience-based mentorship in construction. His company, Ramirez Construction, developed one of the most successful intergenerational training programs in the Midwest. I learned more from my mistake with Zeke than I learned from any success, Buck reflected. I learned that in construction, like in music, you need both the energy of youth and the wisdom of experience. The Chicago Union Station renovation project, where this story began, was completed using the mentorship model that emerged from Ray Charles's intervention. The project was recognized with national awards for both construction quality and workforce development innovation. Today, a plaque in the station's main hall reads, "Dedicated to the master craftsman whose knowledge builds the future and the young workers whose energy carries it forward." The influence on labor relations extended far beyond the construction industry. Universities began studying the Ray Charles model of workplace integration, where older workers were valued for their knowledge rather than dismissed for their age. Business schools incorporated case studies about the Zeke Holloway mentorship program into their curricula, teaching future managers about the economic value of retaining and utilizing experienced workers rather than automatically pursuing age-based workforce reduction. International organizations took notice as well. The International Labor Organization cited the mentorship programs inspired by Ray Charles as examples of best practices for age-inclusive workplaces. Similar programs were established in countries around the world, adapting the intergenerational knowledge transfer model to local industries and cultures. The economic impact was substantial. Companies that implemented experience-based mentorship programs showed measurable improvements in quality control, safety records, and employee retention. The combination of experienced guidance and youthful energy proved more productive than either demographic working in isolation. Ray Charles often spoke about this project as one of his most meaningful offstage accomplishments. "Music taught me that you don't get harmony by having everyone sing the same note," he said. "You get harmony by having different voices work together." That's true in construction too. The story serves as a reminder that experience and wisdom have value that cannot be measured by speed or efficiency alone. Zeke Holloway's 45 years of knowledge represented an irreplaceable resource that would have been lost if not for intervention at a crucial moment. It also demonstrates that innovation doesn't require abandoning traditional knowledge. It requires combining the best of what came before with the possibilities of what comes next. The most successful projects emerged when young energy was guided by experienced wisdom. The legacy of that morning in 1975 continues to influence workplace policies and practices today. Age discrimination laws have been strengthened, mentorship programs have become standard in many industries, and the value of institutional knowledge is increasingly recognized as a competitive advantage rather than an outdated burden. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows that sometimes the most significant changes come from individual decisions to recognize value where others see only limitations. Ray Charles's choice to see a master craftsman where others saw an aging worker changed not just one man's life, but an entire industry's approach to experience and innovation. In an economy that often prioritizes youth over experience, the example of Ray Charles and Zeke Holloway offers a different model, one where the wisdom gained through decades of work is valued, preserved, and passed on to future generations. It's a reminder that in any field, progress comes not from discarding the past, but from building thoughtfully upon its foundation. The educational impact of the mentorship movement extended beyond technical skills to encompass broader questions about how societies value different types of knowledge. Philosophy departments began examining the ethical implications of age-based employment discrimination, while economics programs studied the inefficiency of discarding accumulated human capital. Corporate leadership training programs incorporated lessons from the Ray Charles Zeke Holloway story, teaching managers to recognize and utilize the full spectrum of their workforce capabilities. The concept of wisdom assets entered business vocabulary, referring to the accumulated knowledge and judgment that experienced workers bring to complex problem solving. The influence spread internationally through multinational construction companies that had witnessed the success of the mentorship model in Chicago. Projects in Europe, Asia, and South America began implementing similar programs, adapting the intergenerational approach to local cultures and construction traditions. UNESCO recognized the mentorship model as an important example of intangible cultural heritage preservation, noting how traditional building techniques and craft knowledge were being maintained and transmitted to new generations through structured workplace learning. Medical research institutions began studying the health impacts of the mentorship programs, finding that experienced workers who transitioned into teaching roles showed improved cognitive function and life satisfaction compared to those who faced traditional retirement. The sense of purpose and continued relevance provided measurable psychological and physical health benefits. The program's success also influenced Social Security and pension policy discussions. Policymakers recognized that the arbitrary nature of age-based retirement was not only economically wasteful, but also failed to account for the continued capacity and desire of many older workers to contribute meaningfully to their professions. Labor unions, initially skeptical of programs that might be used to justify extending working years, became strong advocates when they saw the improvements in working conditions and job satisfaction that resulted from better intergenerational communication and knowledge sharing. Safety statistics provided compelling evidence for the mentorship approach. Construction sites using experienced worker guidance showed significant reductions in accidents and injuries. The combination of youthful physical capability with experienced hazard recognition created safer working environments for everyone. Environmental benefits emerged as an unexpected consequence of the program. Experienced workers' knowledge of material properties and building durability led to construction practices that created longer-lasting structures, reducing the environmental impact of premature building replacement and renovation. The Zeke Holloway Institute for Craftsmanship Excellence was established in 1990 at the University of Illinois, funded by construction industry donations and government grants. The institute conducts research on traditional building techniques, develops curriculum for intergenerational training programs, and maintains archives of craft knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Documentary filmmakers and oral historians began capturing the stories and techniques of master craftsmen like Zeke, creating educational resources that could preserve and transmit traditional knowledge even as the original practitioners aged. These archives became valuable resources for construction schools and historical preservation projects. The personal transformation experienced by both Ray Charles and Zeke Holloway continued to resonate throughout their lives. Ray often spoke about how his intervention in that employment dispute taught him about the broader applications of the principles he'd learned in music, respect for tradition, openness to innovation, and the importance of mentorship in preserving and advancing any art form. Zeke's later years were filled with the satisfaction of knowing that his knowledge would survive him. The hundreds of workers he trained carried forward, not just technical skills, but also an appreciation for craftsmanship and attention to detail that influenced every project they touched. The legacy of that confrontation outside Chicago Union Station in 1975 demonstrates that individual acts of recognition and respect can create ripple effects that transform entire industries. It shows that progress and tradition are not opposing forces, but complementary elements of sustainable development. Today, construction projects around the world benefit from the mentorship model that emerged from Ray Charles's decision to value experience over expedience. The buildings constructed using these methods stand as monuments, not just to architectural achievement, but to the wisdom of combining what has been learned with what is being discovered. The story of Ray Charles and Zeke Holloway reminds us that in a rapidly changing world, the temptation to discard the old in favor of the new must be balanced against the irreplaceable value of accumulated wisdom. True innovation comes not from starting over, but from building upon the solid foundation of experience while reaching toward new possibilities. The personal relationships that developed through the mentorship program created lasting bonds that extended far beyond the workplace. Many of the young workers who trained under Zeke maintained contact with him throughout his life, seeking his advice on career decisions, family matters, and life challenges. These relationships demonstrated that the program's value went beyond technical skill transfer to encompass broader human development and community building. Economic analysis conducted by the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics in the 1980s showed that construction companies implementing intergenerational mentorship programs experienced productivity increases of 15 to 20%, along with significant reductions in material waste and rework costs. The combination of experienced guidance and youthful energy proved more effective than either demographic working independently. The success of the Chicago model led to federal legislation supporting age-inclusive workplace initiatives. The Experienced Worker Utilization Act of 1982 provided tax incentives for companies that developed formal mentorship programs, pairing experienced workers with younger employees. The legislation was directly inspired by documentation of the Ray Charles Zeke Holloway intervention and its subsequent industry-wide impact. Corporate training programs began incorporating case studies from the construction mentorship movement, teaching managers to recognize the economic value of institutional knowledge and the hidden costs of age-based workforce reduction. Business schools developed curricula around wisdom asset management, treating accumulated experience as a quantifiable resource requiring strategic preservation and deployment. The influence extended beyond blue-collar industries. Technology companies, initially resistant to age integration initiatives, began recognizing that their rapid innovation cycles were creating knowledge gaps that experienced workers could help bridge. Senior software engineers who had lived through multiple technological transitions possessed pattern recognition abilities that proved invaluable for avoiding repeated mistakes and identifying sustainable approaches to emerging challenges. Healthcare systems adopted similar models, pairing experienced nurses and doctors with recent graduates. The mentorship approach reduced medical errors, improved patient satisfaction scores, and accelerated the professional development of new healthcare workers. Medical schools began requiring rotation periods with designated mentor practitioners as part of their standard curriculum. International recognition came through the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, which cited the Chicago construction mentorship model as an exemplary approach to sustainable workforce development. The program was studied and adapted in developing countries where traditional craft knowledge was being lost to rapid industrialization. The psychological research conducted on program participants revealed unexpected benefits for both mentors and mentees. Experienced workers reported increased job satisfaction, sense of purpose, and cognitive stimulation from teaching roles. Younger workers showed accelerated skill development, improved problem-solving abilities, and stronger workplace loyalty. The intergenerational interaction created mutual respect that transcended age-based stereotypes and assumptions. Educational institutions began recognizing the limitations of classroom-only training for skilled trades. Apprenticeship programs were redesigned to include formal mentorship components, acknowledging that certain types of knowledge could only be transmitted through direct master-apprentice relationships. The Zeke Holloway approach became a template for effective knowledge transfer in practical skills education. Ray Charles continued his advocacy for intergenerational workplace integration throughout the 1970s and early 1980s. He spoke at labor conferences, business leadership seminars, and policy forums, always emphasizing the musical analogy that different generations, like different instruments, create harmony through coordination rather than uniformity. His speeches were widely quoted and helped shift public discourse around aging and employment. The documentary The Master Builder: Zeke Holloway's Legacy was released in 1983, featuring interviews with the hundreds of workers who had learned from Zeke's mentorship. The film was used in corporate training programs and became a standard reference for human resource professionals dealing with age integration challenges. It won several awards for its portrayal of dignity in manual labor and the value of traditional craftsmanship. Zeke's personal notebooks, meticulously maintained throughout his career, were donated to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. The notebooks contained detailed observations about construction techniques, material properties, safety procedures, and problem-solving approaches developed through decades of hands-on experience. Researchers found that many of Zeke's intuitive insights anticipated engineering principles that weren't formally recognized until years later. The ripple effects continued into the 1990s and beyond. Construction projects around the world incorporated elements of the mentorship model, adapting it to local cultures and building traditions. The approach proved particularly valuable in historic preservation work, where traditional techniques needed to be maintained and applied using modern safety standards and efficiency requirements. Academic research institutions began studying the phenomenon of tacit knowledge, the type of understanding that Zeke possessed but couldn't easily be written down or taught through conventional educational methods. This research influenced fields ranging from artificial intelligence to organizational psychology, as scientists and managers sought to understand how experiential knowledge could be captured, preserved, and transmitted. The success stories emerging from mentorship programs created a positive feedback loop that encouraged more companies to adopt similar approaches. Trade organizations developed standardized frameworks for implementing intergenerational training, reducing the barriers to entry for companies interested in age-inclusive workforce development. These frameworks became industry best practices that influenced workplace policies across multiple sectors. Labor economists, studying the long-term effects of the mentorship movement, found that communities with strong intergenerational workplace programs showed greater economic stability and resilience during economic downturns. The knowledge transfer and relationship building that occurred through these programs created social capital that benefited entire regional economies, not just individual companies or workers. The environmental benefits of the craftsmanship approach became increasingly evident as buildings constructed using traditional techniques combined with modern materials demonstrated superior longevity and energy efficiency. Green building certification programs began incorporating credits for construction methods that emphasized durability and resource efficiency over speed and initial cost savings. Professional development programs in multiple industries adopted the Zeke principle, the idea that the most effective training combines theoretical knowledge with practical wisdom gained through experience. This principle influenced everything from pilot training programs to financial services education, wherever complex decision-making required both technical knowledge and situational judgment. The personal friendship that developed between Ray Charles and Zeke Holloway lasted until Zeke's death in 1987. Ray attended Zeke's funeral, where he performed Amazing Grace for a gathering of construction workers, business leaders, and community members whose lives had been touched by the master craftsman's teaching and example. The service was held at the renovated Union Station, in the space where their story had begun 12 years earlier. Sterling Blackwood, the project manager who had witnessed the transformation, established the Ezekiel Holloway Scholarship Fund, providing educational support for young people entering construction trades. The scholarship emphasized both technical training and mentorship relationships, ensuring that Zeke's approach to knowledge transfer would continue benefiting future generations of workers. The influence of that 1975 morning outside Chicago Union Station demonstrates how individual decisions to recognize and value human dignity can create lasting institutional change. Ray Charles's intervention on behalf of an aging construction worker became a catalyst for rethinking fundamental assumptions about age, experience, and workplace value across multiple industries and cultures. Today, the principles pioneered through the Ray Charles-Zeke Holloway collaboration continue to influence workplace policies, educational programs, and economic development strategies around the world. Their story serves as a reminder that progress and tradition are not opposing forces, but complementary elements of sustainable human development that honors both the wisdom of experience and the energy of innovation.